Hey everybody, we are reporting live after the second day of the O'Rourke Homeschool for the Gifted. Today I was in charge of PE class, which entailed a 6-mile bicycle ride, 3 miles up Stanton Street in El Paso, and then 3 miles back downhill. History class, where we're looking at the history of Native Americans. And if you were watching yesterday, I told you that I got us out of Africa to the east coast of Asia, across the Bering Land Bridge, and then down to Patagonia to about 10,000 years ago. Today we picked up with the Olmecs and Olmec civilization, and we're kind of taking it from there. It's been interesting. I've been learning a lot, and hopefully the kids have been learning something too. We had music class where I had Henry on drums, Molly on keys, and Ulysses on guitar, and did not sound half bad. And if the kids okay it, I will shoot out the video of the fruit of our lesson a little bit later today. But one quick story, and then I want to give you a quick update, and I'm going to bring on a very special guest, our friend Debjeet, who is going to be transmitting live from the East Coast, where he is an ER doctor, and we're going to hear his firsthand perspective on what he is seeing when it comes to coronavirus there. But so we're coming back down Stanton Street, and we cut through the University of Texas at El Paso, or UTEP, where there's a pretty steep hill coming down from Kidd Field to where the Student Union is. And one of our kids, I won't say which one, on their bicycle just slammed into the back of, thankfully, a parked car, not a moving car. And the force of the impact was so great, it knocked his shoes off, knocked him on the ground. He was kind of cut up and busted up a little bit and shook up a little bit. And he's okay, by the way. But what I thought was so interesting about it was almost immediately all these folks at UTEP, and some of the grounds crew, and then a couple of the police officers at UTEP rushed over. And first of all, they were so kind and so helpful, and really wanted to make sure that our little guy was okay, and offered to call EMS or an ambulance to take him to the hospital. And we said, no, I don't think there are any broken bones or any lasting damage done. He just needs to kind of walk this one off and then get back up on his bicycle. But I asked him, I said, has it been tough? Because there's just nothing going on campus. And the police officer said it has been. There's literally been no activity because there are no students, there's no staff, there's no faculty on the campus. It's just kind of a ghost town right now. And I kind of got the sense that our son smashing into the back of a parked car was perhaps one of the highlights of the day on the campus. So want to give a big shout out to the UTEP police officers who came to our assistance. A message to them to hang in there. I know it's really slow going right now, but grateful for what they are doing. And proud to report we've survived day 2 of schooling in place as we shelter in place. The kids have survived it. We've survived it. Everyone here is healthy and good. I hope you and your family are healthy and well. And if you are homeschooling, I hope that you and your kids are surviving it as well. I've actually really enjoyed it. I'm learning a lot, and it's kind of developing a different relationship with our kids. So that's the perspective from the O'Rourke house. Amy is outside in this beautiful weather, taking care of plants and bushes and trees in our front yard, and I think she's going to come down and join us in a little bit. I'm resisting the temptation to touch my face because I know we're not supposed to do that. So hopefully she'll join us on the live stream. And again, we're going to have Debjeet on in just a minute. I'm going to bring him on. He's an ER doctor practicing medicine in the Washington, D.C. metro area, and we'll have him on in a second. I want to get his firsthand perspective and hope that you're interested in hearing it as well. Other thing that I want to say is I want to once again thank those public leaders, those men and women in positions of public trust in Texas who have mandated shelter-in-place orders in their communities. I think the first among them was County Judge Clay Jenkins in Dallas County. Maybe most recently among them is Mayor DeMargo here in El Paso, Texas. who have taken the tough but necessary step to ask us to stay in our homes, to temporarily close businesses, knowing that in some cases it may mean that we will permanently close those businesses, because they understand that it is the best way to prevent the spread of coronavirus. I think the lesson we're learning from Italy, from Spain, perhaps in those cases where coronavirus spread almost out of control, and China and South Korea, where they were able to successfully contain it, at least thus far, is you have to react quickly and decisively and unambiguously. And that means everybody stay at home. Shelter in place is the term of art, but it just means do not leave your house unless you absolutely have to for groceries, unless you are going out on a run, walking the dog, hiking in the mountains by yourself or with the family members with whom you live. But do not go to a friend's house. Do not go to a restaurant or bar. Most of them are closed or should be closed in the state of Texas, and I think throughout much of the United States. Do not interact physically, engage physically with other people. It doesn't mean that you have to be alone. And I was talking to my friend Rob earlier today, who said, we may have to keep our physical distance. We may have to be apart from one another, but it doesn't mean that we have to be alone. And I think whether it is live streaming as we're doing right now, whether it is group chats that you're on, whether it's picking up the phone and calling somebody, maybe even writing a letter. God forbid we actually pick up a pen and set it down on paper and then put it in an envelope and send it to somebody. But those human connections, that direct engagement, that just being there for one another is still incredibly important. And that can still happen in shelter in place. So I want to thank all of those throughout this country, and specifically in the state of Texas, who have stepped up, and who have stepped up in the face of the inability to step up from our state leaders in Texas. Our Governor Greg Abbott thus far has failed to announce a shelter-in-place order for the state of Texas. And his rationale follows. He says, well, this may make sense in big cities where we have reported cases of coronavirus, but maybe it doesn't make sense for smaller towns or rural counties. The problem with that logic is because we have failed, and when I say we have failed, the President of the United States has failed, the Governor of the state of Texas has failed to provide testing so that we know who has coronavirus and who does not have coronavirus. We have no idea how widespread this is right now. So many of you have reached out to me to tell me that you or a family member went to the hospital in Lubbock, in Austin, in Longview, and presented with the symptoms that are consistent with coronavirus, and were told to go home because they did not have a test and to isolate. So we have no real count of who has coronavirus or COVID-19 in the state of Texas. So we don't know whether urban areas are at greater risk than rural areas. The best practice that I've seen so far in meeting the threat of this pandemic is to keep everybody at home, apart, and if you are in any way outside and amongst other people, keeping at least 6 feet distance between yourself and anybody else. And the best way to ensure that that happens is to mandate it from the state government, a shelter-in-place order throughout the state. Other states have done it. The state of Texas should step up and do it right now. The logical conclusion of the other argument of not sheltering in place is the one presented by our Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick. I don't know if you happen to see the clip of him on Tucker Carlson on Fox News. I don't know how many of you are watching Fox News or saw it clipped on Twitter, but he literally said that old people in the state of Texas, those 70 years and older, our grandparents, our moms and our dads, maybe some of the people who are watching this right now, should be willing to give up their lives in exchange for reviving this economy. In other words, he's saying not only do not shelter in place, but open up all the restaurants and bars, go back to life as normal, knowing full well that millions of people in a state of 28 million people are going to be exposed to coronavirus. And the most vulnerable among us, older Americans, those with pre-existing conditions who may be very young, who may be middle-aged, who may be old, but all of us will have greater risk of being exposed, of becoming sick, and of dying. And he says that's okay as long as the economy is revived. And I think we can acknowledge that this is very tough economically on a lot of people right now. Every hourly wage worker who has lost their job because a restaurant or bar or hotel that they worked at has had to close down temporarily or permanently, they need help. And the stimulus bill now being negotiated between the Senate and the White House should put them first in line for the help that they need, the economic assistance so that they can pay their bills. We should make sure that their homes are not foreclosed on, that their cars are not repossessed, that they have the food to feed their families and the means to make sure that they can take care of themselves and everyone in their life. I get that. But we can do two things at once. The wealthiest, most powerful, most ingenious country on the face of the planet surely has the resources and the wherewithal and the ingenuity to make sure that we figure this out for those who are in need while still keeping us safe and preventing the spread of infection. So Texas, this is our chance to step up, reach out to our governor, to our lieutenant governor, to our state reps, to our state senators, and urge them to ensure that we have a mandatory shelter-in-place order statewide here in Texas. Those of you in the other states that do not yet have a shelter-in-place order, you may want to take that same kind of action where you are. I certainly hope that we can take that here in Texas. So, a few thoughts, a few reflections on the second day of the Aurora Homeschool for the Gifted and the need for shelter in place here in Texas. Would love to get your thoughts and your questions. If you ask a question, there's a little question box at the bottom of your screen. I will try to get to those, but I first want to bring on our first guest, our only guest today, Debjeet. So Debjeet Sarkar, I'm going to try to get you right now. Let me see if I can figure this out. Guys, give me just a second. I'm going to turn on the Fox right now while I try to figure this out. As luck would have it, it's on commercial right now. Debjeet, make a comment so that I can see you. Okay, here we go. All right, it's now waiting for Debjeet. Hopefully he's able to come on. And hey, Debjeet, how are you?
Hey, Beto, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing really well. So Debjeet, I got to know him through our presidential campaign. He was part of this Road Warrior team, along with Jacqueline and too many people to name, Thomas and many others, who would literally travel anywhere in the country that we needed people to sign up others to get on the ballot. And I remember seeing you in Alabama where you were doing that work, who never asked for permission and also never really asked for forgiveness either. They just did the work that they thought the campaign needed, whether or not they were directed to do that, which was really impressive to me as a candidate at the time. But even more impressive was the fact that Debjeet is also a doctor, taking care of people in his community, and not just taking care of people in his community, taking care of people in other communities. One of the last times I saw you, Debjeet, you were just back from the Rio Grande Valley here in Texas, where on the other side of the border, there are literally thousands, tens of thousands of people who traveled more than 2,000 miles from Central America, fleeing drought and famine and violence and persecution to come here to lawfully seek asylum. And through the Orwellian named Migrant Protection Protocol, were forced to wait on the Mexican side of the border, prey to anybody who would want to take advantage of them. And many people were. And Debjeet and many other volunteers went down to go provide medical assistance to literally the very most vulnerable among us. And so this gives you an idea of the kind of man, kind of person that Debjeet is, and why I'm so grateful to call him a friend, and also really happy that I have the chance to talk to him today. Debjeet, you're practicing medicine right now. You're an ER doctor. Tell us where you're practicing medicine, if you're allowed to do that, and tell us a little bit about what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, so thanks for the invite to you and Cynthia, Beto. I hope everyone's doing well across the country and around the world. This kind of hit us very suddenly, probably at the end of February, as the New England Journal of Medicine article came out. A lot of the doctors that have been overseas and deployed and have done a lot of work in epidemiology really ended up kind of raising the red flags at that point, trying to mobilize resources. I work at Howard County General Hospital in Columbia, Maryland. It's a subsidiary affiliate of Johns Hopkins. So we have a larger kind of mothership hospital, and then we have us in a couple of sites around the DC and Baltimore area. So a very large catchment area of patients. And kind of listening before what you were saying about not having a lot of testing, I think that was the biggest holdup for every physician, not knowing, given the overlap of this particular virus with a lot of other viruses that we see day to day, like influenza and RSV for children. It's really challenging to separate them to make a diagnosis, except this was novel, and we didn't really know transmission rates 100%. We didn't know who was going to get sicker, who's not getting sicker, who's got immunity, things like that. Thinking about this kind of after Cynthia's invite, I think the most important thing for me to try to get out is just how brave our nurses are. I don't think they get enough credit in our society and around the world. And I want anybody that's listening to just know how hard that job is on a regular day, to stand at the front lines, and then to also have to make sure that you're protecting yourself and going home to your families. I think that's one of the most brave things I've ever seen, and I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they're wearing full protective gear. They're going into rooms fearlessly with me to put these nasal swabs up people's faces to get these samples, which then triggers a cough and a loud sneeze, and that spreads particles everywhere. And so these nurses are literally in a line of fire from collecting samples. So I hope everybody, if you know a nurse, if you're around a nurse, please thank them, support them in any way you can. They are really doing everything they can to protect and save lives.
Debjeet, I don't know if you had a chance to meet my sister Charlotte. She's an ER nurse here in El Paso. And I talked to her yesterday, the day before. She just finished a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift, which is her normal shift. And she talked about a patient who'd come in who had flu-like symptoms. And of course, they were concerned about coronavirus. But they asked all these questions. Have you traveled outside of the United States? Have you traveled outside of El Paso? Ran through the gamut and assured themselves it was highly unlikely that this person was exposed. Well, later on, and they're not wearing protective gear because they've in some ways been disarmed by the answers that this person's given them. They later learned from the person that someone in their family had traveled to a place where there's a hot spot of coronavirus. And she said the look on all the nurses' faces who've just been in the operating room and where perhaps, the coronavirus had become aerosolized and perhaps they had inhaled it, just this look of defeat on their faces. I'm sure that kind of story is happening many times over. And the concern that you have for yourself, exposing your family to coronavirus, but also exposing the other patients that you see over the course of the day. And it's one of the reasons that personal protective equipment, or PPE, the gloves, the masks, the visors, the gowns, has commanded so much attention right now because we're literally about to run out. I know that some of the medical students with whom you work organized a drive to collect this PPE from labs, from others who have surplus supplies. Can you talk a little bit about that and tell me whether your hospital is seeing a crisis in the availability of PPE and what that would mean for your patients?
Yes, so number one, I want to thank everybody from your Twitter feed and other folks that have retweeted and joined. I'm not on social media, but I know that that's a really important component to spread the word, and my students have taken this and run with it. In 7 days, they're now in 31 states. They've gotten 197 volunteers. They're giving hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of gloves, gowns, and masks across the country. They are called Med Supply Drive. They are at Med Supply Drive on Instagram. Please help support us. We are basically collecting unused goods in terms of gowns, gloves, masks, things that are sitting around in laboratories because they're closed, that are not getting used, and we're repurposing them to get them to folks like myself in the ICUs as well, which is the next level of care that's going to require a lot more PPE than even the emergency department, and then also to the nursing staff, as I mentioned in particular. So our students, Hannah, Zuby, and a whole cadre of really strong, powerful women have led the movement from Georgetown University School of Medicine. We'll take any support we can get. And if you're in one of the states that we're not in, please reach out to us, and we're going to try to link up and get supplies out to you. If you don't think it's going to hit you, it's going to, and you need to be prepared. In terms of our supplies, Beto, I think we're fairly okay. Our nursing staff and my team, we recognized quite early how to get creative, how to improvise, and how to reuse. We're reusing our face shields, like our face masks that protect us from patients coughing on us with sputum and blood and different things. And then our N95 masks, which are, you know, in general, not very used in the emergency department because we don't see a lot of diseases that are this infectious. We were low on supply to start with, but we've gotten creative on how to reusing those. We've mobilized some hardware stores. There's all kinds of different techniques that we can use to try to extend the life of those. The problem's going to be in about a week where, at least for us, I can speak at our hospital, are we going to start getting supplies in, or is there going to be kind of a national bidding war? I think that's what a lot of us are afraid of, that the bigger fish are going to kind of swallow up the smaller ones, and some of these other hospitals that really are going to have sick people in rural parts and underserved areas are not going to get the PPE that they really need, and that's where we need the manufacturing. Our job with the MSD or medical supply drive is to really fill that gap and create an infrastructure to then use our medical students to then get those things out to these hospitals that are maybe underserved and are going to need just as much care as people in larger cities.
On the topic of trying to extend limited resources as far and as effectively as we can, I don't know if you heard the proposal raised by Governor Cuomo in New York today, but the idea was send all surplus ventilators to New York, which is one of the crisis locations, one of the true hotspots. Allow us to stabilize the population, and then we'll send those on to the next hotspot. In other words, if we cannot produce these ventilators quickly enough, if we can't buy them quickly enough, then let's get them, let's take them from where they're not being used, ship them somewhere where they need to be used, right. New York. Then when New York's done with them, the curve has hit its peak, it's coming back down, send them off to, I don't know where the next hotspot is going to be. What do you think about that idea?
I think it definitely merits consideration just based upon, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn what has happened in Italy, what's happened in China, what's been successful. And I think we can troubleshoot some of these issues, but I think the sheer amount of lack of supplies, I guess is a better way to put it, that's going to kind of hit a breaking point if there's 2 or 3 states at the same time. So right now it's California, it's New York, it's Washington, and the way the curves are going, I'm not sure there's just one repository. So I'd like to see maybe 4 or 5 cities like Houston, Dallas, like the 9 or 10 largest cities in America, pull together the ventilators and then use FEMA as like a central clearinghouse. There's some folks called Project N95 that are working on something similar. I believe Mark Cuban has funded them and done some things in the last 48 hours, if I'm not mistaken. But there's a way, I think, where we have to set up an infrastructure network, because while New York's the big deal right now, and deservedly so, I think there could be other states, either contiguously or around the country, that are going to need maybe more than we can provide. But it's definitely merits consideration. I think Governor Cuomo's kind of led the way on making sure we're serious and we're focused on beating this thing.
Last question from me, and then if you have a couple of minutes, I want to bring up a few questions from those who've asked questions. Sure. Through the little question icon at the bottom of the screen. Tell me what you're seeing in your hospital. Are you seeing patients with COVID-19? If you are, what does that do to resources that would otherwise be devoted to other patients with other ailments or needs? How have you all had to change what you do in your hospital because of coronavirus?
Yeah, it's a really important question for people to know out there. Our ER is still functional, it's still working. We're treating heart attacks, we're treating blood clots, infections, and we found a way to actually kind of using a lot of military concepts that I have kind of brought into the equation from other colleagues that have served with me, is we've created our hot and cold zones. So our hot zone is where our concerning persons under investigation are for coronavirus. We've seen a lot of positive tests as we've tested more, and had a couple really serious ones where we've had to put a breathing tube down, which is the highest risk patient given the concern for exposure to the medical staff as well as radiology technicians and laboratory personnel. So the intubations have kind of taken their own life in terms of how we're protocolizing that scenario. The folks that are coming through the front door, we're trying to screen them just like every other emergency department and determine, like your sister's case, whether they traveled, whether they have fever, whether they have a cough. So some of that still holds true, but the overlap is pretty tremendous, and it's hard to separate, okay, is this person having a heart attack because they have coronavirus or because they just have a bad heart today and we should still test them for coronavirus? So there's a lot of Still nuances that you have to kind of work through, but we're doing the best we can to make sure everybody is taken care of. And we've got different protocols in place for separation of patients by their severity, just like we would in any triage scenario in the emergency department.
Debjeet, I brought up the first question from a viewer. What is the procedure protocol for patients waiting on the results of the test? So my understanding is the test results are not immediate. They may not even be same day. Right. What are you supposed to do after you've been tested? Have you all tested people at your hospital, and what have you asked them to do while they wait on the results?
Yeah, so we've tested hundreds, and it's a nasal swab. Again, it's one of the most uncomfortable experiences to have a long cotton tip swab shoved up the back of your nose for a few seconds. But the most important thing is that people think they're sick and they have access to testing. I'm still encouraging it. I want us to know our numbers, especially in states that have not locked down, especially if patients have active symptoms and they're feeling sick enough that they can't stay at home. I want to know if they have it, because then I can know if I can quarantine them and monitor them and surveil them and make sure that they're not going to spread it and make sure that they don't turn into an intubation case. So the most important thing is if you're feeling symptoms and you're in a place where you can get tested, I'm still encouraging it. And I know there's been some concern about New York City and Los Angeles to not test, but at least in the state of Maryland, DC, and Virginia, Johns Hopkins is running their own tests in-house, so we have access to it. And I'd like to get a little bit more epidemiology and understand it. I think patients that are waiting for tests, do what you're doing. Stay inside, wash your hands, social distancing, all the things that are now common vernacular right now. We need to continue with that, because there's a lot of people that are getting tests back at about 24 to 36 hours. And I think that's the rule around the country. If you're doing an in-house test, if you're sending one out to LabCorp or Quest, those are places that have maybe a little bit shorter turnaround. And just a lot of things that we're doing in-house is we're really trying to call people, follow up. If they have a positive test, are they sick, or do they need to come back in and see us and get admitted? And so much of it is clinical just gestalt, like just knowing that someone who traveled or someone who has a high fever is just not safe to go home. I had a 55-year-old gentleman was seen in a pulmonary office with one of my trusted colleagues, and he and his wife both got sick, but he got sicker. So the pulmonologist has been calling them every day, brought him back in, and I ended up having to put a breathing tube down him at age 55. And that was just great communication, and he's improving. He's still very sick, but we might have caught him in the nick of time. And so the best thing I can say is be patient with the testing. If you think you're getting sicker, I would try to present to the emergency department, call from the car so that you're not contaminating the emergency department, speak with the charge nurse and see what their plans are to get you into an isolation room or potentially to admit you. There's lots of different protocols in different hospitals, but that's what we're currently doing in Howard County.
Tell me what you think about this. In China, my understanding is that if you tested positive for coronavirus, you could not go home and try to isolate yourself, because almost by definition, you will not be isolated. Your family will be there, and you will, if they're not already infected, you will pass this on to them. And so you would be taken to these makeshift hospitals or dormitories that they set up. And many public health experts credit that practice with limiting the spread. It is draconian, might not be something that could, happen in the United States. Tell me what you think about the efficacy or the wisdom of doing that. And then you kind of address testing. Why the hell do we not have tests, and why would we not take the tests from the World Health Organization or other countries that have been able to produce them in mass supply? And then there's this question from Danny, and I'm sorry, Cynthia's telling me I've got to remove the question because it's covering up your face. The question is, how quickly can symptoms go from mild to emergency? So if you can handle China isolation from your family to why the hell do we not have tests, and shouldn't we test everyone so we know how this is spreading, to this question from Danny, how quickly can symptoms go from mild to emergency?
So I want to start with the last one because that's probably what I know more about than the other two. So the symptoms that we're seeing, probably about 3 to 4 days, if you're a positive test. We're seeing positive tests, we send them home, and then 3-4 days later, it seems like you're either kind of making a slow curve recovery, or you're getting sicker, requiring hospital stay, observation, medical treatment, IV medication, sometimes a breathing tube. So that question, I think, has been proven out in the data from China as well, like reading the studies from Wuhan. It's a little bit of kind of a numbers game, but I think probably about day 4, if you're really, really sure you're positive, about day 4 is when we're seeing on a median how many people get respiratory distress and illness. I think in terms of testing, I really don't know the answer to that, to be frank. I don't know why it wasn't accepted. I don't know if people were just undercutting the, virility or virulence of this, I should say. I don't know if people were just kind of thinking it's going to go away with the temperature or weather like prior pandemics. And so I think there's a really big question we have to answer after all this is done. How are we going to prepare for the next one? And what are we going to do differently as a country and as a world to make sure that we have the test? It's actually not a very challenging test to run. It's called reverse transcriptase PCR. Most labs can run it. You set the standard, you get approved by the FDA, and you can run it. And we're running hundreds per day at Johns Hopkins in-house, so the larger medical centers can run it. So I don't know the answer to that one, Beto, and to the viewers out there. In terms of the hotel idea, I think that was really smart for China to do, to really truly segregate and isolate people and socially say, okay, we're going to take care of you so that you can't spread things. And I just don't know if the American public has the appetite for that. And I'm using my basis for what we did with the migrant population in El Paso when I was there working. We would put folks in these really rundown hotels, probably haven't had more than 4 or 5 people per day check in there, and we're putting 400 or 500 people in there. And even then, when people were, had traveled 2,000 miles and were exhausted and sick, they actually didn't like being in that arrangement. And so maybe there's a different way to do it. I've heard, repurposing stadiums and large arenas and things of that nature, which I've seen after hurricane relief and disaster. I wish we had been more prepared and planned, because I don't know if that's going to be useful right now. But it's a great thought, and I think we should learn from other people that have been through it, in particularly Italy, which is just getting crushed right now.
I know that we promised to get you out 5 o'clock Mountain Standard Time, and that's where we are. Do you have time for one more question from a viewer?
Yeah, can I also just add one thing that I really want to add that's really important to me, and I hope this is okay. I think it will be, just getting to know you for the last year or two. There is something my medical students and I talk about quite a bit, and it's called social determinants of health. And I teach a course at Georgetown part-time, and it basically, the factors that go into how people get health care, how they get the care that they need, whether it's insurance or whether it's getting a life-saving procedure. And a lot of the principles we talk about there are pretty relevant right now. And I would like people that are listening to spread the word and just think about the people that are underserved right now and how you can contribute, whether they're elderly and need a Meals on Wheel drop off, whether there's a part of your town or your neighborhood that is maybe, quote unquote, run down and doesn't have like a grocery store that's working 24/7. See if you can find a way to drop off food without, direct, contact, and keeping social distancing. That's the best thing we can do to take care of each other. And the last thing I'll say is, we asked our students to follow a hashtag called Unsung Heroes. There is a remarkable cadre of people that help clean my medical rooms, that are mostly immigrants, that are Hispanic and African immigrants, that put their lives at risk every day away from their families, exposed to this virus, cleaning their rooms so I can actually have a place to see and care for other human beings. There are people that are keeping our water running, our lights up, the truckers that are delivering food every day, and then the people that are actually collecting trash and doing custodial services. They are not forgotten. In modern times, we kind of forget them for a lot of reasons as like part of our essential infrastructure. They are essential personnel right now, and without them, we can't do anything. So thank you all. If any of you are listening out there, it's a team effort, and we're going to win. We just need everybody on board to do the right thing.
Thanks for lifting them up and reminding us to follow Unsung Heroes so that we learn more of these stories. I'll tell you, from talking to the ER surgeons and physicians and nurses at the hospitals that received the patients after the Walmart shooting in El Paso on August 3rd of last year, so many of them spoke to me about the janitors and the cleaning staff in the trauma bay. They'd bring a patient in, they do everything they could to save their lives, and then get them on to another room before the next patient came in. And almost like a NASCAR pit crew, that cleaning team would come in and wash and disinfect and get ready that room And the doctor said they're just as important as, I am, or this nurse is, or anyone else. And, you said that at the outset of this conversation about the nurses and other frontline staff. We think about those who are stocking the shelves, those who are ringing up our purchases at the grocery store, the police officers and firefighters who are still having to do their job. So many people who are having to sacrifice so much right now. And so we are grateful for all of them. Here's the last question, Debjeet, from one of our viewers. This is from Lisa. How common are false negatives, especially if you're presenting with symptoms?
Yeah, so super tricky question. I have not seen a lot of false negatives so far. It doesn't mean they can't exist. I think all of us that are in the moment, we're concerned about that because our clinical suspicion is high that someone is sick. I think a lot of it comes down to the sampling, as I mentioned, how aggressive that is, getting a proper sample. I've checked with a lot of my colleagues that are researchers and work with reverse transcriptase PCR, and do it for a living. And they have told me as reliable sources that they believe it is accurate. If there's any of this RNA up in your nasal pharynx, which is kind of not just the nose, but also the posterior portion that goes into the back of the palate and the mouth, that if the sample has any content of the RNA, the capture rate is very, very high. But that doesn't mean I'm telling people to just say, okay, your test is negative, that's it. We have a callback program in place where we're checking on everybody, negatives and positives, till we get a better handle on what this disease can really do short, medium, and long term. So if you really think somebody is still having fevers, coughing, has no other alternate explanation, I'm really encouraging people to just have an open dialogue with either the hospital where you were tested at, the drive-through test where you were, or your primary care physician, because they may need to retest you, because in theory, you could have tested a little bit too soon where you didn't have enough of the virus multiplying or replicating inside the nasal passages, and a day or two later, it's now gotten to that point. Shouldn't be that way though, in all honesty, because if you have enough of the virus in you, the symptoms should dictate that you have enough of it in it, and then the testing should catch up with that significantly. So it's a really tricky question to answer, but I think if you're still really sick, I'm not sure I would necessarily believe that the test is negative. Consider getting retesting and keep in communication with your healthcare professional.
Thanks for answering that. And thank you for what you're doing. I've got to tell you, as dire as this crisis is, and as frustrated or disappointed as we are in the lack of leadership from the president and in our state from the governor and lieutenant governor, to know that you're out there and people like you are out there. We spoke a couple of days ago to Amy's sister, Christina, who's a doctor in New York City. It really gives me a lot of hope and leads me to believe that we're going to find a way to get through this. And you've been so calm and so patient and so thoughtful in the way that you've shared all this with us. And I hope that everyone will follow your advice of washing your hands, staying at home, keeping your distance from other people. But you also mentioned finding a way to help and check in on those who might not have anyone in their lives to do that for them and may be unable to do it for themselves. So when you find someone who needs food, leaving that food for them at their front door, not shaking their hands, not hugging them, as painful as that is for some of us who rely on, that kind of interaction to communicate our care for one another, providing that food and just knowing that you're being checked in on and knowing that someone cares about you can be life-saving in and of itself. So love the message that you're sharing. Grateful for the work that you and your colleagues are doing right now. I hope that you will let us check in on you again as this progresses so that you can share more of what you're seeing and give us more advice and answer more questions from those who are tuning in to this Instagram Live.
Awesome. Thanks, Beto. Everyone stay safe, be careful, and take care of each other.
Likewise. Really good to see you.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everyone. Big thanks to Debjeet for joining us on this is not a live stream, I guess that's a Facebook term of art, on Instagram Live. And tune in with us tomorrow. I think we're going to get together at the same time, and chances are we're going to be joined by Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, who is an extraordinary public servant. And an example of that is the fact that I think he's one of the first, if not the first, county judges. And in Texas, the county judge is really the chief executive of the county to implement a shelter-in-place order. And Dallas is a very large metro County a very tough decision, not popular in every circle, but in the county judge's judgment, this was the best step he could take to save the lives of those for whom he's responsible and who he serves. So want to have him on to talk about that decision, to talk about how the shelter-in-place order is going in Dallas as we see other shelter-in-place orders being announced in other communities across Texas, including one just announced earlier today in El Paso. Later in the week, we're going to have Maggie Asfahani, who is the proprietor of Salt and Honey. It's a restaurant that has had to close its doors, as have almost all restaurants in Texas. Some of them are providing takeout orders. If you can patronize a local restaurant, and someone just mentioned that you should patronize Jacalito in El Paso, or L&J or Eloise, or any of the locally owned Savage, which is right by our house. Any locally owned, locally run business, not only is that going to guarantee a good meal for your family, but it's going to help keep them in business and allow them to keep their employees on the payroll so that they're doing as well as they can amidst all of this. We're going to have one of those restaurant owners on the show a little bit later. She's also someone who has started a fund in El Paso for out of work restaurant, bar, hospitality industry employees. So we're going to hear from her what that has been like. If you have other suggestions for people that you would like to be able to ask a question of or hear their perspective, given what's going on in the country and in our communities right now, please let us know. And we'll try to get to more of your questions as they come through. Someone asked if that's an REI sleeping bag behind me. It is. Molly, do you want to say hello real quick? Molly's coming in to say hi. What have you come say hello. Tell folks what you've been up to.
Planting.
What are you planting?
Flowers, and we're also cutting down some flowers so they're overgrowing.
They're overgrowing. And can you, I know I'm putting you on the spot, can you tell me how day 2 of homeschool went? I told them about what happened. Let's not name his name, but I told them about what happened to one of our kids on the bike ride back.
Oh, yeah.
How was homeschool today?
It was good.
Yeah? Do you have more than a one-word answer on that?
No.
But it was good.
Yeah.
Did you like music class? What here just to see if this stuck? What did we study in history class today? What was the civilization in Mexico?
Did it start with an O?
Yeah.
And then T?
No, O-L. O-L-M.
All?
The Olmecs.
Oh, yeah.
The Olmecs, yeah. Anyhow, day 3 tomorrow. Wish us luck. Huh? Really?
My birthday.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure.
So Molly, last thing, Molly is, I think, going to take the lead in the family on a chicken coop. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Like about what?
I don't know. Why do you want a chicken coop?
Because we're going to get chickens from Tractor Supply, and then we're going to keep them inside for about 3 weeks until they have like all their little feathers, and then they'll go outside in a little coop, and then they can start grazing the backyard, and it'll have the soil be fertilizer, natural fertilizer, and it'll give us eggs.
It'll give us eggs. And do you think Artemis and Silver are going to get along with the chicks?
Well, I don't know if they'll get along with the chicks, but we're going to train them to not like go after them. I don't think they will, but yeah, we'll train them right when we get them home.
Got it. Okay. So we may have some news to report if we're able to pull off the chicken coop. Hope everyone is well, is being safe, is being healthy, is being smart, is being good and kind to one another. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, where again I hope we have Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins joining us live to answer your questions and to talk about the shelter-in-place order that he just implemented in Dallas County. Good to see you all, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye.